begin to record the session. We should receive a notification as to that. And we'll get started. Before we begin, just some opening thoughts. We want to be as respectful as possible when addressing our students, and we're going to use identity first language in this panel. We'll do our best, but please do not penalize us, and mainly myself. I'm still learning, continuous lifelong learner here. So please don't penalize this or hold this against me if I intermix identity first language with person first language unintentionally. Additionally, we're going to be discussing neurodiversity from the autism perspective, because that is where the terminology neurodiversity comes from. However, there may be occasions where the discussion is applicable to the neurodiverse community as a whole. So just a couple thoughts before we begin. I'd like to thank our panelists, even before we begin, who have dedicated so much time to preparing for this panel today. I'd also like to thank our AAfPE community as a whole, who's been so supportive, especially our executive board, our president, Paige Beadham, who's here today, as well as I'd like to give a special shout out to my sister, Heidi Robb, who's also on the call, who, sorry, Heidi, who was a driving force behind this panel today, who initiated this conversation and got the conversation going. So thank you, Heidi. She's an administrator at Preston College in Arizona. So thank you so much to our panelists, to the AAfPE Outreach Committee, and to Heidi for all of their contributions to today. All right, so our first question is just going to be our introductions. I'm going to display our panelists in portions of our panelists' impressive biographies, but they're going to tell you a little bit about themselves, namely their name, occupation, connection to the neurodiverse autistic community. And so we will begin with Dr. Lawrence Fung. Welcome, Dr. Fung.
Thank you, Becky, for the warm welcome, and thank you for organizing this panel and inviting us to be part of it. It's quite a privilege to be here. My name is Lawrence Fung. I am an assistant professor in psychiatry at Stanford University. I got into the field of autism just about 16 years ago when my son was diagnosed with autism. And in the past like 7-8 years, I have been, as my son is growing up, I feel like I really want him to have a positive identity about himself. And I have been researching on neurodiversity ever since, and have founded the Stanford Neurodiversity Project just about 6 years ago. And we have various different programs in the Stanford Neurodiversity Project for employment, for education, and mental health. We also have a summit that is coming up in October 1st to 3rd. So if you're interested in learning more about our work, please go to our website and even consider registering for the summit.
Thank you, Dr. Fung. Our next panelist, Vanda Kadam.
Thank you, Becky, for your wonderful introduction and for organizing this really important panel and this presentation on neurodiversity and neurodivergent individuals. So my name is Vanda Marie Kadam. I'm a family lawyer and a special education attorney, and I have my own private practice. And I ended up in the world of autism because I have an autistic daughter who is now 27 years old. And as a result of looking at the lack of lifelong learning and educational and musical and vocational opportunities, I consider that an issue of civil rights for autistic populations. So I launched a foundation called Autism Higher Education Foundation.
It's about neurodiversity.
And we have, developed numerous programs. I can refer you to my website to see what we've done, but in music education, and also now in paralegal assistant training in the courts. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Vanda. John Caldora.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Caldora. I'm a disability accommodations consultant with the Disability Resource Center at UK. That's the University of Kentucky. I have been working in this area for about a decade now. I'm autistic myself, and I started presenting back when on neurodiversity and on working with neurodivergent students, although we used different terms back then, since I was a college student myself, and I've spent the last decade teaching university staff and faculty onto how to best interact with and support this population. In addition, I'm a member of the College Autism Network's Consultants Collective. We are a group of experts who work with college autism support programs around the country, who go around and help people with their presentation and program development needs.
Thank you, John. Gail Dorn.
Thank you. My name is Gail Dorn. I'm a director of a paralegal studies program at Del Mar College in Corpus Christi, Texas. I became interested in this subject mostly as my advising position as the director, and also doing advising for other students in our department. I first became aware of it probably from students approaching me about their own autistic children and how to try to help them in the school system and troubles they were having in the school system. And then also in 2016, I was awarded the second time that our school provided the Disability Advocate for the year. And so consequently, I became more involved with our disability service and counseling here at Del Mar College. And it seemed to be an issue that was constantly cropping up, but yet these students seemed to really become engaged when they got interested in paralegal issues. So that's how I became involved with it. And also I'm a level 3 advisor here at the college. I took my own tact on that. And so just here to help the students and hopefully learn from this conference as well.
Thank you, Gail. And last, but certainly not least, Cheyenne Barnett.
Hello, everybody. My name is Cheyenne Barnett, and I am a student mostly. I just graduated with an associate's in psychology from Del Mar. While I was there, I was part of our neurodiversity club, and so I am just really looking to learn as much as I can and hopefully pay that forward as well.
Thank you, Cheyenne. All right, our first substantive question for the panel is, what is neurodiversity? We're starting right at the building block. So Dr. Fung, would you like to begin?
Sure. Neurodiversity is one of the newer ways of thinking about diversity, just like the diversity in racial, ethnic differences, gender differences, etc. It is about the diversity of the brain. So basically, neurodiversity is about acknowledging that people with differences in their brain function and their behavioral traits are part of normal variation of the human population. That's kind of the succinct way of thinking about it. And we'll talk about what are some examples of neurodiverse conditions later.
Thank you, Dr. Fung. John, did you want to add anything? Oh, you're muted, John.
Warning came up and I was like, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So I tend to describe neurodiversity with a bit of a extended metaphor. If you think of a box, and in that box you have a brain, and that's what we call the neurotypical brain. that brain in that box is basically what we use to define our world. That is the box that designs the places we work, the places we live, how we interact with one another, how we build relationships. And so we rely on that brain in that box. Now, if you go around the world and you look at how that changes based on cultural or racial or ethnic differences, we still ultimately rely on that brain in that box. The question is, what happens when your brain doesn't fall into that box, when your brain kind of is outside of it? And that is where we're talking about neurodivergent people. I think neurodiversity, ultimately, it's a very umbrella term. It's a very wide way of thinking of people who, you know, might think differently or who might not be comfortable in the world around them due to a disability that is related to the brain. And there's no general consensus on who falls under that umbrella, except autism. We all agree autism falls under it because autism's the person holding the umbrella. That's where neurodiversity grew out of. But ultimately, it's a different way of looking at the challenges that our students experience in these areas.
Thank you, John. Cheyenne, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I believe the other two gentlemen pretty well covered it. It's definitely a loose definition of a concept, I suppose. Looking at it from the angle of when we were trying to start our club to see what our definition was going to be for it, it wound up just anybody who doesn't follow a neurotypical way of doing things, I suppose, a perspective. So it definitely wound up being very, very open.
Great. Thank you. All right. Our next question is, what are some examples of neurodiverse conditions? Dr. Fung, you alluded to this earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just like what John was talking about, autism is definitely the first condition that people are thinking about, because the term was coined by Judy Singer and others that are really referring neurodiversity or the neurodiversity movement as a movement to help the autistic population so that they can be viewed differently and using more of a strength-based angle. However, if we are using the definition that I talked about earlier, we can definitely say that there are other conditions that should be under the umbrella of neurodiverse conditions, such as dyslexia, ADHD or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, even other conditions like the motor disorders, like Tourette syndrome, as well as other neurologic and psychiatric conditions, like even epilepsy should be considered as a neurodiverse conditions. And a lot of these conditions have one thing in common, in that there are a lot of misconception on how these people are able to do or not able to do. And because of that, there is a lack of opportunities for people with various different neurodiverse conditions. So having a very broad umbrella of acknowledging that brain differences can cause misconceptions, and we need to fix that, I think is a generally reasonable message.
Thank you, Dr. Fung. The next question is, how might these conditions present in a classroom? John, would you like to start off speaking to this?
Sure. So most common things that you might notice is students who might be disengaged from what's going on in the classroom, or students who might be very uncertain if you say have a class break into groups. That is sort of a situation where a lot of neurodivergent people kind of find themselves looking around and being like, okay, what do I do? What do I do? Who should I group with? Because that thing that aspect that comes naturally to a lot of our other students might not come naturally to our neurodivergent students. You also might have students that are asking you questions pretty consistently, and they might be very deep and introspective, but they might get your lesson plan for the day a little off track. In addition, students who might not do well in a large or noisy classroom and might need to step out for a few minutes, just to get things, get their emotions and get their senses back to some sort of equilibrium. So those are some common ways that might show up in a classroom.
Thanks, John. Cheyenne, anything to add to that?
I've also, there might be fidgeting of some sort. So like taking apart pins and stuff as a way to keep their hands or their focus divided, so it's easier to focus on the teacher. And it's can sometimes be viewed as disrespectful, but it's generally not meant to be. It's just a way to make it easier to focus. Along with sensitivity to sound, there might also be a sensitivity to the lighting. So that might be a thing where if they're wincing coming into the classroom. I think that's everything I have to add.
Okay. All right, thank you, Cheyenne. Gail, anything from the paralegal instructor's perspective?
My experience is to really work hard, especially if you're doing advising, to keep an open communication with the students, because they eventually have a tendency to tell you what's bothering them in the classroom. And I think when they select, if you do group work, that when they select a group, to see how they select it, because I think you can benefit them more, not necessarily let them do that, but try to put them in with a group once they either communicate or you have observed how they're functioning in the classroom, to kind of put them in a group where it might help them. And I think that's what we can do as educators, definitely. But the student, if you keep that open communication going and try to keep a good relationship with your students, I tend to be a bit aloof. A criticism I get quite a bit, but I also think it lets them look at me more professionally, and will eventually tell you what they need and to just try to respond to it.
Thank you. The next question is, what resources are available to neurodivergent students? Gail, do you want to start off with this question?
Here at Del Mar, I think we do a pretty good job with it. We have an actual, they're going to rename it, but we have a disability division or a department where the students can either be referred to or they can seek out for assistance themselves. Also, most schools that I've experienced with anyway, and having discussions with them, generally have a counseling area. And if they have somebody in counseling who educates themselves or knowledgeable about the neurodiverse students and some of the issues they have, some of the issues they go to counseling for may actually be as a result of their particular situation. And then and we're lucky to here to encourage the clubs, and I think more schools should do that, and more organizations, because once they kind of get together and share information, they can help each other as well as help us understand their skill set and their special needs. Though you still have to be careful under the federal law and FERPA that we can't really approach them about it. They have to kind of pull us in. And the key, I think one thing we have as lawyers, as educators, is we're pretty good at that. That's what we do. We tend to ask questions and kind of get things out and be able to communicate options that they are. But but I think there's a lot more availability with them. But I encourage them to communicate that to you so you can help them do that.
Thanks, Gail. John, would you like to expand on that from the counseling perspective?
Yeah, from the perspective of requesting accommodations, Getting accommodations for autism is difficult in many parts of the United States, mainly because it's difficult to get an autism diagnosis. Typically, if you are not diagnosed in K through 12, it is something that is the testing required is not covered by insurance, and so you may have to pay out of pocket for that. A lot of times what we do is a student may have a co-occurring disability, such as depression, anxiety, ADHD, something else where we can offer similar accommodations. But typically how that works from a disability services perspective is a student will register with our office, we'll meet with them, go over their documentation and figure out what they need in order to have equal access to the classroom environment. We don't, what we do is we change the speed at which information flows or how the information is transmitted. We don't change the information that they are learning. They're still required to learn and meet the same learning objectives as any other student at your institution. And typically, we do this by offering accommodations. Some common ones for students who are autistic is extended time on exams, testing in a low distraction environment, being able to take a STEM toy, which is something, that you play with just absent-mindedly so you can focus with you into exams or the classroom. Using noise canceling headphones is another popular one. And then there might be some classroom accommodations as well, which might include being able to, walk out and make up any work that you miss. If you need to, go out and take a few minutes to regulate your senses or your emotions. Might also include getting a copy of the PowerPoint if it's not already provided, or being able to audio record the lecture. Or it may include, having an option to work independently instead of in groups, or public speaking alternatives as well. So there are a lot of ways that we can, provide accommodations for students. The question just becomes, what does that specific student need?
Great. Thank you. Our next question also kind of parallels a question that I see.
Becky,
Yeah.
can I jump in? At the risk of being self-serving, I had a question myself. And is it okay? Is this how you want the questions as we go or at the end?
No, that's perfect, Paige. Yeah, as we're going.
Yeah, Gail had mentioned a problem that I encounter with some frequency. How do you best address a student who you suspect could benefit from either a diagnosis or some of the resources that we have that is not self-identified? Does the panel have any advice as to appropriately approaching a student in that manner?
I do it kind of tricky about this. I've done it when I've suspected that I have issues like that in the classroom and the students not taking my hints. I actually have them come talk to the class because that's something we have to deal with as lawyers. And if you're going to be a paralegal, you may work for somebody, you have to do that. I do it as part of getting a job, kind of information you can talk about. So I'll actually bring somebody from our disability services and talk to the class. And that works pretty well. And then, because they can talk about it in terms of trying to just inform the students. So that's one thing I tend to do that works pretty well.
Yeah, I'm with Gail that this is an area that's kind of tricky, and I like her solution to it, inviting your disability services staff in, or someone to speak on working with a particular population. Another thing is, it's okay to say to the student, hey, I've noticed that sometimes this is going on in class, and just wondering if there's something we at the institution can do to assist. Have you, considered speaking to the counseling center about it, or considered maybe, that maybe if you have a disability, going to the disability resource center. It's okay to say that. It's just, you have to be careful to, not presume that the student has a disability. That's where you can tend to run into a lot of trouble with the ADA, but I'm speaking to a room full of lawyers, so y'all probably, have the degree in that. But, it is okay to refer a student to an appropriate resource. That's part of our job as educators. So that is okay.
Thanks, John and Gail. I also see in the chat from Bernie, in some courses I teach and for some of the assignments, all students are presented with a variety of options for demonstrating competency. And this is something that we discussed with the panel a little earlier. Dr. Fung, you mentioned universal design. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so along the same lines, at Stanford, I teach neurodiversity, and a part of it is to try to understand how to do some projects that are going to be beneficial to the neurodiverse community. And some of the tools that we will use or concepts that we gravitate to would be universal design. We also use design thinking as the approach to the projects. But when we are talking about universal design for learning, is really about allowing students to have multiple ways of representing themselves and multiple ways of being engaged and engage the materials, as well as multiple ways of really doing things and expressing themselves. So basically, because when we are talking about all of these concepts, like some of the examples that our class would use, for example, as an illustration of what is kind of the norm of doing things in a way that is consistent with universal design, is to allow students to tell us about what they actually would learn best, how they would learn best, and we can really adjust the approach of teaching accordingly, and kind of one step backward to talk about what universal design is really allowing for when we are trying to understand what the people need when they are kind of at the extreme of the bell curve, so to speak. The needs from people who are clearly wanting to do things differently, you often benefit all the other students. So one thing that we do is, for example, in our lectures, we will make sure that we have the materials all posted ahead of time in our in Canvas, our learning platform. When we're teaching, especially when there is any video, we make sure that there is closed captioning for people that need the closed captioning. And we also make sure that in terms of any testing, we have ample time for all students. So a lot of the time when the Disability Services Office, what they would do is, if you have a diagnosis such as ADHD, they would almost automatically give the student 50% more time. So basically, for a 2-hour exam, they would have 3 hours. But basically, what we do is that we give 3 hours to everyone anyways. So that basically would take away the need for students to request for more time. So that takes away the barrier for not having enough time. And our exam is actually designed to be completed in an hour and a half. So for 2 hours, it's going to be good for most students. And for 3 hours, it's basically double the time. So all the students will not need to actually get a letter from the Disability Services Office, and they will automatically be able to get their the exam done within enough time. In rare situations that they need more time than the 3 hours, we give them the extra time anyways. We are not trying to get our students to complete the exam within the allotted time. That's that doing the test faster does not mean that they are actually learning the materials more. So so we take away the factor that this is actually something that we care about. We want the students to learn best, and when they are wanting to contribute to like group projects, for example, we also encourage students to tell their group members what they can contribute best on, as long as everyone are more shy the presentation, but they can research for the team very well. So our course will make sure that they have multiple ways of contributing to the work. They don't necessarily have to be evaluated all with the same cookie cutter scheme. So basically that's kind of throughout the class itself, and when the students are doing their projects, they also have to use universal design concepts in their own projects so that they can actually internalize how universal design can be operated.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fung. I also really liked Kelly's comment in the chat here that she builds resources into the syllabus content to refer back. I think that's also really great. Best practices. Thanks, Kelly. So the rest of this question also discussed how can educators best support students who are neurodiverse in the classroom. Cheyenne, I'd love to hear your perspective as a student as well.
Yes, so I really like Gail's method, and John as well kind of tied into it, of bringing people in to talk about it, kind of in the same way that you bring in people to talk about where your speech helps are and your computer lab helps are, or like your library, at least our college did, because it then takes the pressure off of the student. Because honestly, if I was approached by a teacher who was like, hey, do you need like extra assistance or help, or is everything okay? It would kind of put me immediately on the defensive of it. So I like the idea of, instead of trying to approach the student directly, maybe just making yourself approachable about it to let them know that you would support them in trying to help them if need be, and let them approach you, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, our next question is, how can neurodivergent individuals fit into the legal system? So Vanda, we'd love to hear your perspective.
Thank you so much. So I'm going to really speak to the cohort of autistic adults who have more challenges, potentially in terms of, cognitive challenges and so forth. So the program that I launched through the foundation, Autism Higher Education Foundation here in Massachusetts, which is called the Paralegal Assistant Training Program, the PLAT program. We launched this in approximately 2016 with the Probate and Family Courts, the Chief Justice of the Probate and Family Court, Angela Ordonez. And the idea behind it was really to focus on the cohort of autistic students in the age range of 18 to 22 who are still in their high school special education programs and who cannot pass our state exams called MCAS, which you must pass. It's in math and science and English. You must pass those 3 exams in high school in order to get a high school diploma. And so that's a whole nother issue, which is very upsetting to me, but that's not for today. And so what happens is that these cohort of students who can't pass these tests, and many of them can't, remain in their transition programs through special education until they turn 22 years of age. And those transition programs here, the focus is on vocational training, sort of lifelong learning skills, adaptive skills, etc. And there is a paucity of vocational training opportunities for that cohort of students. And this was very upsetting to me. So I had an epiphany with my own daughter, who was entering that program. And I didn't want her to just be collecting carts in a grocery store, to have her help me in my office with filing a stack of, bills that were like 2 inches thick. And she would be viewed as someone with an intellectual disability. And once I showed her how to do it, literally within 30 minutes, she'd figured it out. And she wouldn't eat dinner until she finished the whole stack. And for me, the light bulb went on. And I said, oh my goodness, in the court system, we are antiquated here. There's so much paper. People are drowning in paperwork in law firms, and my firm, in the courts. So I immediately reached out to Angela Ordonez with this idea of, what if we developed a program and we had the cohort of students 18 to 22 going into the courts and helping with the repetitive tasks that need help, such as scanning, court files. And so basically we launched the program, and we looked at all of those projects in the courts that nobody had the bandwidth to be able to do, because the court employees are already overworked and underpaid and so forth, as vocational training. And so, for example, in one of the courts, which had many of its files in storage because they were changing buildings, they needed help with having all those files scanned, entered into a mass court system, data entry that would involve data entry and unstapling and scanning and data entry. And it was literally, when we broke it down, a 22-step process. So we broke every single step of the process into a visual, which was like 10 pages long, literally taking pictures, breaking it down to the most basic element of the task. And it was a complicated scanning protocol. And we had students, many of them with a similar profile of, intellectual disability, autistic students, who went in there and literally had memorized this 22-step protocol and did it to perfection. And so all of those files that had been sitting there for like years and maybe decades and needed to be, put online, these students did it. And so anyway, to make a long story short, and they did it to perfection. And if there was ever a mistake, it was because the skill wasn't taught properly. We hadn't broken down the step. So for example, as a very obvious example, if a page of a brief wasn't scanned correctly, it might have been because we didn't break it down to say you have to remove the staple from the brief, right? So it's that basic. Now, for some students, they didn't need it to be that basic, but for others, so this is the idea of kind of like universal design, right? You break it down to its most basic element, whatever the project is that needs to be done. Another example, we had students in the district court who need to send out mailings to the lawyers to get rid of their exhibit folders or exhibit files. And when you say, for example, to a student such as my daughter, I want you to fold a paper, right? So she might, I don't know if you can see me, she might fold it like this. She's folding it, right? But that's not how you fold a piece of paper to put it into an envelope. So the protocol we had to use was, tip to tip, we had to break down how to trifold. And then within a minute, our students understood. So The bottom line was we recognized we can't make assumptions. And in the legal community, when you're trained as a lawyer, one of our mantras is don't assume anything. So it's the same thing in terms of teaching our students. Don't assume that when you say fold a piece of paper, it's clear what that means. If you're taking it literally, then you're folding it like this, right? So at the end of the day, there are huge opportunities for autistic students of all abilities to participate in the legal system. There are many, many projects that would make our neurotypical, quote unquote, paralegals glaze over. I'm thinking about document production. I'm thinking about scanning. I'm thinking about shredding. I'm thinking about mailing stuff out. I'm thinking about data entry. And these are the skills that our students who are more challenged intellectually can really do well with if they're taught correctly. And I'm hoping that our program, which is already in numerous probate and family courts and district courts, and we had the appeals court participating in Massachusetts, that we can, expand it across the country and pull in, state and federal agencies to pull our students in and help with some of this incredible, work that needs to be done in terms of dealing with our documents.
Thank you, Vanda. Your program is really inspiring, and it makes me want to go to Cook County court system and introduce the same thing here. So I know we have a lot of paralegal educators on the call, so thank you so much for sharing this process with us. Gail, would you like to speak from the emphasis on degree seeking students?
I think the important part is because you can do this so well in the legal profession, because there are just so many options you can do with a paralegal skill set. And so I think it's important, and I mean, as paralegal educators, we all clearly recognize our students from the beginning to the end, the ones that are going to be good in certain areas and others maybe not so good, is to try to match that student skill set, or try to recognize it and work with the student on them also recognizing or developing a skill set that will be good for them to the type of law practice that they can go into. Give them those options. They may have a really good skill set to work well in a title company where you need that minute detail. If you have a student that tends to need to do the same type of thing to get them into, to help give them information on that area or the different areas of the legal profession available, because they recognize what they can do well. And I think sometimes that's my difficulty with other academic areas in the school, is that just sometimes they don't. You've got to fit, the student has to fit into the professor's mold. And I'm not for that at all. And like with me, I design all of my assignments for all students. I give parameters, and then, then they have to go get the information to fit that parameter. Like if we're going to prepare a will, so we'll go on the website, find a famous person, they have to have 2 children, they have to have a current spouse, an ex-spouse, give them the parameters, they get the information and can put it together. And how they put it together, it doesn't really matter as long as they get to the bottom line at the end, and they do it correctly, and they hit all the all of the the things you have to do the project correctly. So that's kind of what I do. But I try to work with the student and constantly let them know. I bring in guest speakers all the time. We actually are developing a program right now where they're going to shadow somebody, and they're going to have the opportunity to do it in different areas of the law, so they can figure out, and that's for all students, really. That really fits all of them, but, where they fit in and what skill set they have that, clicks into the areas where they can get a job, keep it.
Thank you, Gail. All right. This next question is, what's your biggest challenge in the classroom, and also what's worked well? So Cheyenne, I'd like to direct this one to you if you'd like to give some input.
Yes. So for me, there's been two big things. One that was major, one that's a little bit more minor, but now that I've realized it, it's kind of helped the first one. So the first one was, I spent a lot of my time masking, which essentially was draining my energy and my ability to be really actually focused in my classes. And that did wind up causing some issues for me. So after that whole realization of what was going on, I have started trying to learn to just actually be myself with the idiosyncrasies that comes with. The other thing I've noticed is, I mentioned this earlier, but it really is the lighting sometimes. It just, I had a professor who noticed it apparently, so she started turning down the lights, and she's like, anytime you need to, you can just turn down the lights. And once that became a thing, I noticed how much easier it was in the classroom for me. And it wasn't just myself. Almost anybody in the classroom, once you turn down the lights, seemed to relax a little bit, whether they were neurodivergent or neurotypical. It was just, yes. So it was definitely the lighting help, but also the trying to stop masking. So and feeling safe in the classroom to not to have to mask. So that was a big thing.
Yeah.
I just may say, I think it would be really useful if Cheyenne could explain what she means by masking for those participants who haven't heard the term before. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, sorry, I didn't even think about it. Okay, so masking, the way I tend to view it is, well, you're taking everything that doesn't fit what is normal, and then you're hiding it away so that you can pass. Nobody's going to look at you and think you're weird or different or not fitting in. You just take everything that doesn't fit and you hide it every day, all the time. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you, Cheyenne. And you have some support in the chat here saying that masking is exhausting, and some a lot of our participants who are agreeing with you. So thank you for sharing that with us. And thank you, Vanda, for the clarification also. All right. The next question is, what traits can help neurodivergent people succeed in the workplace? I don't know, Vanda, did you want to start off with this one?
Sure. I mean, I can mention some of them, and I think, intense focus. So intense focus and drive, and at least in terms of the students that we have seen who are doing this paralegal assistant work, the focus and the drive to complete whatever the project or task is at hand without getting distracted socially, for example. And so just a lot of motivation to do the job and do the job correctly, and do the job efficiently. And I think that's huge. And it's just important. It's so important for employers to reach out to autistic students and give them a chance, because there's so many barriers to employment, so many barriers. And I think that if employers realize really the benefit and advantage of hiring autistic individuals in terms of their work, we need a paradigm shift is really what it boils down to. We really do. We need a paradigm shift in the employment community.
Thanks, Vanda. Dr. Fung, would you like to discuss a little bit about the Neurodiversity at Work program and your perspective?
Yeah, sure. So just to add on what Venka was saying about intense focus, it's definitely a common trait for people on the autism spectrum. They tend to also be drawn to details. So when you have work that's focusing on the details, rather than the big picture all the time, they are the right people to focus on finding the needle in the haystack, or they are any things that will be really requiring a lot of like persistence in finding that detail. Sometimes some people on the autism spectrum can be viewed as like doing things over and over again, but when the result is good, it's actually persistence. So basically, they are very persistent in doing something that they are interested in, and they can be hyper focusing on certain things, and the deep interest that they can develop can be really be a big asset to what they are that they can contribute in the workplace. And for people with ADHD, they may have different traits that can be very highly desirable, and their high energy can be really driving them to be more able to get things done, multitasking a lot, and especially when they are very interested in that topic. When they are not interested in the topic, they don't get it. But when they're interested in the topic, they definitely get it, and they would be hyper focusing on it instead of not being able to focus. So some of these are very common that we are seeing in the Neurodiversity at Work program. We have this program for several years now, and we have been collaborating with organizations that would like to hire people on the autism spectrum. And we also work with autistic individuals. So we have both the candidate registry as well as the job bank. And basically our belief is that it is the mutual responsibility on making the workplace more neurodiversity friendly that can make things work in the long run. Not just the employer finding all ways to accommodate. It is also not the neurodiverse individuals' responsibility to find out how to work in the neurotypical world. It is both the neurodiverse individual trying to understand what the workplace is requiring them to do. There are certain things that are ingrained in the culture of the organization that is very difficult to change. But if there are opportunities that employers can take into account with the understanding of the characteristics of their neurodiverse employees, they can make the workplace a lot more neurodiversity friendly. And a lot of the time, the accommodations that can be very easy to incorporate are not asked. And when they are not asked, the neurodiverse individuals cannot work very well because they get distracted or even triggered if in a bad situation, if they are in a place that have that resemble past traumatic experience, for example. So basically, we want in our program, we make sure that we help the employers to understand how to make the employment process, the hiring process more neurodiversity friendly, and also in the transition stage when the neurodiverse individuals start work. So this has been helping autistic individuals in making sure that they are not going to be prematurely written off in the hiring process, because a lot of the time in the typical hiring process, a lot of the human resource professionals use their first impressions, and their first impressions would not be helpful for autistic individuals. A lot of autistic individuals are very good in their work. They have excellent qualifications, and they should be evaluated by their qualifications and what they can do and what is the fit based on the work, and not based on first impressions. So basically, when we work with the employers, we make sure that some of the things that we often do is we discourage any open-ended questions. Open-ended questions like "tell me about yourself" or "tell me about your 5-year plan" or whatever is very common. It's almost like used 99% of the human resource professionals, and that can be helpful for a lot of the neurotypical individuals, but for neurodiverse individuals, especially for those that are on the autism spectrum, open-ended questions are not helpful. That can only get the autistic individuals not to be able to focus on something that is most helpful for the employers to know. So basically, we guide the employers to make sure that they are asking the right questions, so that the talents of the neurodiverse individuals can be uncovered. And some other techniques too. I'm not going to, I can talk about it all day.
This is very helpful. Thank you so much, Dr. Fung, as well. We kind of covered this next question in your last answer, Dr. Fung. So I wanted to open up the panel then for questions, since we covered a lot of the questions that we had planned throughout the other questions. So are there any questions for our panel today besides what's been asked already?
I
Oh,
don't see anything in the chat, so I think we're good.
I have,
But-
is it Rena? I'm sorry, am I saying your name right? Reina Rodriguez? Would you like to ask?
Reina. Yeah. I'll just reiterate what I said in the chat, that you guys are so accurate. But one other thing I wanted to offer about the masking, that's difficult for those of us who are passing, because we are masking so heavily. And again, for anyone that didn't see it, I'm not an educator, but I do have autism and ADHD. The difficult part of that is that so many people who are unfamiliar and why your work is so vital, is that we're constantly being told, and Cheyenne can probably relate to this, but we're constantly being told that we don't look like we have autism, or we don't seem like we have autism. And that's part of the exhaustion of masking. And you're always having to combat the two worlds of we're not autistic enough, to where people don't say that to us, and then you have to like convince them, because they go, well, everybody deals with that. Everybody gets overwhelmed, or everybody, and so you're always having to decide what it is to mask and what not to mask. And so I just kind of wanted to offer especially women, we're magicians when it comes to learning how to fit in, or chameleons. A lot of times people call us chameleons because we can be thrown into a room and pick up on it real quickly and how to fit in. So I just wanted to offer that additional info in regards to the masking, that it's such a vital part of a component to this neurotypical, neurodiverse world. And I appreciate you guys for all of the insight you're offering everyone.
Thank you so much, Raina. Thank you for sharing that and for this solidarity and your perspective and your experience. That's why this panel is here. So thank you.
Becky, I just wanted to offer, and I don't know whether, like, when human resources comes in and talks to the classroom, they offer any kind of reading materials that may benefit students. But there is, and I don't know whether any of our panelists have heard about this book, but there is a book that I came across that was recently published that is superb, and it's called The Adult Autism Assessment Handbook, a Neurodiversity Affirmative Approach. And the authors of this handbook are both autistic and non-autistic and not autistic. It's the authors are Hartman and O'Donnell. And it is a really wonderful resource because so many autistic individuals who don't get diagnosed in childhood, possibly because they've learned to mask the whole time, it's really hard to get a diagnosis. And I think this book is something quite remarkable in terms of the resources in this book. And it's written both by autistic and non-autistic authors. I don't know if Dr. Fung or others have heard of this assessment handbook.
I haven't. I'm looking at it right now. It's published February 21st this year. Yeah, I would love to learn more about this this book.
Thank you, Vanda. That's a great resource. I'll have to read up on it as well. I think we're just past our time now. As Dr. Fung mentioned, we could go on forever, I think, talking about this topic. And I'd love, I'll send out a survey following today to get your perspective as well. So thank you all so much for joining us. I'd like to thank first and foremost our panelists. You all are so inspiring, and thank you for dedicating and volunteering this time with us today, and not only today, but the preparation sessions and my personal learning sessions that I feel like I've had with each of you. So thank you so much. And thank you for all that you're doing in the neurodiverse community as well. I'd like to thank AAfPE, our president, Paige Beadham, who is here today. It is a huge supporter of our efforts, as well as the outreach committee as well, who have helped us draft these questions and get speakers for today. So thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Becky, and everybody so much. Great panel.
Thank you. All right, everyone, have a great rest of your day. Take care.